The myth we think we know. We think we know. Isaac Newton. The image is practically burned into the cultural imagination. A solitary genius sitting beneath an apple tree, minding his own business, when suddenly, gravity happens to him. The apple falls, the heavens open, and the universe reveals its secrets to a chosen mind. He's the cold, calculating father of modern science, the man whose logic was so sharp it sliced the cosmos cleanly into laws. But that story is a beautifully polished illusion. Because the real Isaac Newton was not the serene professor of popular legend. He was a storm contained inside a single human body, angry, obsessive, wounded, mystical, brilliant beyond reason, and driven by forces even he didn't fully understand. The man who wrote the laws of motion also spent decades deciphering biblical prophecies. The man who invented calculus also hunted for the philosopher's stone. The man who measured the orbits of planets also interrogated criminals and sent them to the gallows. He was not a contradiction. He was a complete human being, unfiltered. And that is what makes his story essential. Because Newton does not simply explain the universe. He exposes the paradox at the heart of human nature, the collision between logic and longing, precision and passion, ambition and fear. To understand Newton is not to understand equations. It is to understand ourselves. So let us peel away the myth and follow the real man into the places where genius, ego, and humanity blur together. A world without why. Imagine living in a world where no one truly knows why anything happens. A world where apples fall, but no one can say for sure whether the same something governs the moon. A world where planets drift in elegant loops across the sky, but their motion is explained through divine breath, invisible spheres, or angelic guidance. A world where Earth is chaotic, imperfect, and unpredictable, while the heavens are divine, immaculate, and ruled by completely different principles. Before Isaac Newton, that was reality. Humanity lived inside a split universe. Down here on Earth was disorder. Up there was perfection. To cross the boundary between the two was unthinkable. The very foundations of natural philosophy forbade it. Scholars believed the celestial realm was governed by divine geometry, while Earth followed cruder rules. Into this divided cosmos was born a man who could not tolerate division of any kind. A man whose entire psychology was shaped by a hunger for unity. One rule, one system, one set of laws binding apples and moons, stones and planets, flesh and stars. And that hunger would become the engine of the scientific revolution. The child who craved control. Isaac Newton entered the world in 1642 as a premature infant, so tiny that relatives believed he wouldn't survive the night. His father had died months before. His mother remarried when he was 3 and left him behind. He grew up, essentially, abandoned, raised by his grandmother, in a household where he was more ghost than child. It is impossible to overstate the emotional imprint this left on him. Newton did not learn to trust people. He learned to observe them from a distance, the way a scientist studies insects. Yet inside that quiet, solitary child was a furnace. We know this because of a document he wrote in adolescence, a list of sins. Most are typical teenage anxieties, lying, missing church. But then there is one line that catches the breath, threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. This was not a mild-mannered boy. This was a mind forged in emotional violence, turned inward, sharpened, silent. But he found solace in something that would shape his entire destiny, making things that obeyed rules. He built miniature windmills, sundials, mechanical toys, water clocks. He created tiny worlds that behaved exactly as he commanded. These weren't pastimes. They were therapy. In a life that had denied him stability, he built stability with his own hands. He crafted order where none existed. And eventually, he would attempt to do the same with the cosmos, because Newton teaches us this fundamental truth about humanity. We seek control where we lack comfort. We seek structure where we feel abandoned. We seek laws when the world gives us chaos. For Newton, understanding the universe wasn't academic. It was survival. The plague that set genius free. In 1665, the Great Plague swept across England. Cambridge University shut down. Students were sent home to avoid the outbreak. For most, this was a devastating interruption. For Newton, it was liberation. He returned to Woolsthorpe, the quiet farmhouse of his childhood, far from academic competition and criticism. Away from society, he became something else, something dangerous, a mind with no distractions. In his solitude, Newton began to perform mental labor so intense that later scholars would struggle to understand how a single human could hold so many simultaneous insights. Over roughly 2 years, Newton laid the groundwork for a new mathematics, calculus, a new physics, the laws of motion, a new cosmology, universal gravitation, a new optics, the composition of light. It was the most productive intellectual period in recorded human history, and it happened because Newton was alone. Isolation didn't diminish him, it ignited him. This is another uncomfortable truth he reveals about humanity. Some minds do not bloom in collaboration. Some do not thrive in communities. Some need silence, distance, and solitude to unleash their potential. Newton was one of them. The question that broke the universe. In half one day, in his orchard, Newton watched an apple fall. This moment was not magical. It was ordinary. What was extraordinary was what happened inside his mind. He asked a question no one else dared to ask. Does the force that pulls the apple down also reach to the moon? That question, centuries of dogma shattered. For 2,000 years, philosophers had insisted that the heavens and the earth obeyed separate laws. Newton rejected that in a heartbeat. He imagined the moon as a falling apple, a body constantly pulled toward Earth but constantly missing because of its sideways motion. He realized, the moon is falling. It simply never lands. That one insight unified the cosmos. It told humanity that heavenly perfection was a myth. The same laws govern everything, and the universe is a single, coherent machine. But Newton was not satisfied with intuition. He needed proof, and to calculate proof, he would need something the world had never seen before: the invention of a new language. As Newton tried to turn his gravitational insight into mathematics, he ran into a fundamental problem. The existing math of the world was too primitive. Algebra could not capture instantaneous speed. Geometry could not describe constantly changing motion. No tool existed that could track the curvature of a planet's orbit with infinite precision. So Newton did something only a handful of humans in history have ever done. When the language of nature did not exist, he invented it. He created calculus, his method of fluxions, a system capable of slicing time and space into infinitely small pieces, revealing the motion inside the motion. Once he had this new language, the heavens opened. Planets followed mathematical curves. Gravity could be quantified. Forces could be described. But here is the darker revelation. Newton did not share calculus. He hoarded it. He guarded it. He feared criticism. He feared theft. He feared rivals. This reveals yet another truth about humanity. We are capable of world-changing brilliance, and terrified of the world at the same time. Genius does not eliminate insecurity. Often it amplifies it. Newton had discovered a new universe, but he hid it in his notebooks. The Principia begins with a knock at the door. Nearly 20 years passed before Newton's breakthrough saw the light of day. In 1684, Edmund Halley visited Cambridge to ask Newton a question that had haunted astronomers. If gravity weakens with the square of distance, what shape should a planet's orbit follow? Newton answered instantly, "An ellipse." Halley was stunned. "How do you know?" "I calculated it," Newton said, casually, as if discussing the weather. But he could not find the calculation. So Halley urged him to redo it. And when Newton sat back down with the problem, something inside him rekindled. He didn't just redo the work, he rebuilt the universe. He wrote and rewrote, refined and expanded, pushed and polished until he produced what many consider the greatest scientific book ever written. Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. With it, he defined 3 laws of motion, united earth and sky under a single law of gravity, predicted tides, comet path, and planetary orbits, transformed physics from philosophy into mathematics. He had done it. He had turned the universe into a system, a machine, a knowable whole. But beneath the triumph was something darker, something rising. Newton had an enemy, and he had no intention of sharing glory with him. And as Newton stood on the edge of the greatest intellectual triumph in human history, something important becomes clear, not just about him, but about anyone who journeys this far into the unknown. Breakthroughs are not gentle. Revelations are not peaceful. And the mind that dares to reorganize reality often pays a personal price for seeing too deeply. If you're still here, listening to the unfolding story of a genius shaped by brilliance and brokenness, then your curiosity is the kind that fuels this channel. So stay with us, because the turning point in Newton's life is coming. Do not forget to like and subscribe. From this moment on, brilliance meets rivalry, discovery meets obsession, and the universe meets the darker edges of the human soul. The rival who unleashed Newton's wrath, Robert Hooke, a brilliant, sharp-tongued experimentalist, had criticized Newton's work years earlier, and Newton never forgot. Hooke had a gift for provoking resentment. His mind was dazzling, but his personality abrasive, and he wielded his intellect like a blade. Many contemporaries found him intolerable. Newton found him unforgettable. When Hooke claimed to have influenced Newton's ideas on gravity, something inside Newton snapped. What Hooke saw as a rightful acknowledgement of his contributions, Newton saw as an attack on the unity and purity of his achievement. And to a man who had spent his entire life seeking control over nature, over knowledge, over himself, that kind of threat was intolerable. Newton's fury didn't erupt publicly. It calcified quietly, with precision. He did what he always did. He returned to the page. In the manuscripts of the Principia, he rewrote sections. He adjusted language. He refined proofs with such perfection that no critic could penetrate them. He elevated the roles of astronomers like Huygens and Halley, while subtly diluting Hooke's presence until it faded into mere invisibility. This wasn't simple pettiness. It was a strategic repositioning of history itself. Newton sharpened the mathematics, tightened the arguments, and constructed the narrative of gravity in such a way that his work appeared not merely correct, but inevitable, originating solely from his own insight. And the more ironclad the Principia became, the easier it was for the world to forget Hooke's earlier claims. Hooke, for his part, grew increasingly bitter. His health declined, His influence waned and his scientific circle shrank. But Newton's ascent had only just begun. Years later, when Newton became president of the Royal Society, a position of immense influence, Hooke's final legacy met a quiet, devastating fate. His portrait, once displayed in the societies halls, mysteriously vanished. No confirmed image of Robert Hooke survives to this day. Historians debate what happened. Some argue Newton ordered its removal. Others believe Newton simply did nothing as time, neglect, and convenience swallowed Hooke's memory. Either way, Newton did not restore it. He did not preserve it. He did not protest its disappearance. He allowed silence to finish the work he had begun. Hooke disappeared from view. In a cruel symmetry, the man who had once studied microscopic life with such clarity became invisible in the historical record, and the man who had decoded the grand motions of the heavens now reshaped the motions of memory. Newton had rewritten the cosmos and quietly rewritten the story of who helped him. It reveals something unsettling. The power to discover is, at times, the power to erase. Because history is not only shaped by those who uncover truth, but by those who control how that truth is told, who is remembered, who is forgotten, whose portrait hangs on the wall, and whose portrait quietly disappears. Newton's brilliance gave him mastery over nature. His authority gave him mastery over narrative. And in Hooke's disappearance, we glimpse something far larger than a rivalry. We glimpse the human ability to sculpt not only the laws of the universe, but the memory of who mattered in uncovering them. The calculus battle that scarred European science. While Newton was polishing the Principia, another force was rising on the continent, a different kind of genius named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Newton and Leibniz were not opposites. They were mirrors. Both saw the inadequacy of old mathematics. Both invented calculus independently. Both created new languages for describing change. But Leibniz did something Newton refused to do. He published. And his notation, di, dx, sigma, was elegant, intuitive, and powerful. It spread quickly through Europe. Suddenly, mathematicians everywhere were asking an explosive question. Who invented calculus first? This was not merely academic. This was a legacy. This was immortality. Newton's friends whispered that Leibniz must have stolen ideas from Newton's early manuscripts. Leibniz's supporters claimed Newton was too secretive to prove priority. The dispute became a continental storm. But here is where the crisis turned tragic. Leibniz appealed to the Royal Society of London, the most respected scientific body in the English-speaking world, for an impartial investigation. What he didn't realize was that the society was now ruled by one man, Sir Isaac Newton. When the judge writes the verdict, the Royal Society formed a committee to investigate the priority of calculus. On paper, this looked fair. In reality, Newton hand-picked its members. Worse, he secretly wrote the committee's final report himself. The report declared Newton the original inventor and implied, without explicitly stating, that Leibniz had plagiarized him. Newton then went a step further. He anonymously published a review praising the report's excellence. This wasn't just conflict, this was domination. Leibniz's reputation was damaged beyond repair. He spent his final years fighting accusations, falling into despair. When he died, almost no one attended his funeral. European mathematics fractured for generations. The British clung to Newton's notation. The continent embraced Leibniz's. The divide slowed scientific progress in England for almost a century. Newton's victory came at a cost far larger than either man realized. He had revealed a truth about human nature that is as old as history. The pursuit of truth and the pursuit of power often collide, and truth does not always win. The hero of reason, the prisoner of his own shadows, we like to imagine that scientific progress is noble, that great thinkers rise above ego, that they seek only truth. Newton reminds us that genius is not an antidote to insecurity. He could calculate the orbit of a comet to the year. He could split sunlight into its elemental colors. He could describe the motion of planets with flawless precision. But he could not tolerate sharing credit. He could not bear the thought of a rival overshadowing him. And so he used his influence not just to understand the universe, but to shape the story of who gets remembered within it. This duality, this mixture of brilliance and fragility, is not a contradiction. It is humanity. We are creatures who want to discover truth, and creatures who want to own it. Newton was both at once. Into the darkroom. Newton the alchemist. We like to tell Newton's story as the birth of modern rational science, but behind the radiant clarity of his mathematics was a secret world, a world of furnaces, coded manuscripts, strange symbols, and experimental dangers. Newton was an alchemist, not in the playful, mystical sense we imagine today. In the serious, obsessive, life-consuming sense of a man who believed ancient wisdom had concealed the true nature of matter. He built a private laboratory and spent countless nights watching flames shift colors, powders react, metals melt, and vapors condense. His notebooks overflowed with cryptic recipes. The green lion shall consume the sun. The red dragon shall rise from the ashes. These were metaphors, symbolic instructions handed down from medieval alchemists. To Newton, alchemy wasn't superstition. It was a path to the deepest structures of reality. He believed that matter contained hidden principles. Transformation was the key to understanding nature. Ancient sages encoded their knowledge in symbolic language, and the philosopher's stone might reveal the unity of the material world. Modern scientists ran chemical analyses on his preserved hair. The mercury levels were extreme. Newton had poisoned himself in his pursuit of transmutation. This part of his life is often excluded because it complicates the myth of the rational scientist. But it is essential, because it shows us something profound. Humans do not seek only explanations. We seek meaning. We seek transformation. We seek secrets. Even the mind that made gravity measurable longed for mysteries beyond measurement. Newton was not ashamed of this. He believed that nature had two books, a book of laws written in mathematics, a book of symbols written in metaphor. He wanted to read both. The biblical scholar who searched for the end of days. If Newton's alchemy surprises modern audiences, his theology shocks them, because buried beneath the equations, beneath the laws of motion and the optics experiments, and the polished brilliance of the Principia, lies a truth that feels almost unbelievable. Newton wrote more about God, prophecy, and scripture than he ever wrote about mathematics or physics, not just more, but vastly more. His papers on theology and biblical chronology fill millions of words. His scientific works, the ones we celebrate today, are a fraction of his lifelong output. For Newton, the universe was not divided into science and religion. That division came later, imposed by centuries that misunderstood him. Newton himself saw only one universe, governed by one truth, written in two languages, the language of number and the language of revelation. He believed that early Christianity preserved a pure knowledge of God, an original clarity that had been corrupted by the church, twisted by politics, and obscured by centuries of theological disputes. So he set out to recover it, not through prayer or tradition alone, but through the same tools he used to investigate the physical world: logic, analysis, and relentless discipline. For decades, Newton pored over biblical texts the way he pored over comet trajectories, line by line, symbol by symbol, searching for underlying patterns. He compared ancient manuscripts. He cross-referenced historical chronicles and astronomical events. He built vast tables and charts, some stretching pages in length, mapping kingdoms, prophecies, and timelines. He tried to decode the book of Daniel as if it were a cipher. He examined the book of Revelation like a puzzle designed by the same mind that designed nature. He produced elaborate chronological maps of human history, convinced that divine logic lay hidden beneath apparent chaos. To Newton, prophecy wasn't mystical poetry. It was encrypted law. He believed that God revealed himself in two ways: through natural laws, gravity, motion, the structure of light, and through divine patterns in the sweep of history. Both, he insisted, were meant to be deciphered by the human mind. Both were puzzles left intentionally unsolved. Both required curiosity, discipline, and a willingness to pierce through surface appearances. This is where Newton becomes particularly revealing, not as a scientist, but as a human being. Because for him, scientific discovery and theological discovery were not separate quests. They were two halves of one obsession: to find the underlying order of reality. Gravity was God's grammar. Prophecy was God's syntax. Nature and scripture were two volumes of the same text. Newton was not embarrassed by this unity. He was driven by it. It gave his life coherence. It gave his discoveries purpose. It allowed him to believe that the universe was not just mechanically intelligible, but morally intelligible. Not just structured, but meaningful. And here is where his story becomes a mirror for humanity, because this impulse to find order not only in the physical world, but in the spiritual and emotional and historical world, is not unique to Newton. It is woven into us. Humanity seeks order everywhere, especially in the places where order is least guaranteed. We do not tolerate randomness easily. We do not accept chaos without resistance. We want the universe to speak to us. We want events to have significance. We want the story of existence to be more than a coincidence. So we take mystery and turn it into a pattern. We take uncertainty and turn it into prophecy. We take the noise of history and search for signals. Newton simply did this at a scale and with an intensity that few minds have ever matched. He chased meaning with the same ferocity with which he chased equations. His search for God was not a detour. It was the fuel of his intellectual engine. And far from being a flaw, this was the fullest expression of his humanity, because it reveals a truth about us all. We want the universe to make sense, not just mathematically, but personally. We want laws that govern the stars and purposes that govern our lives. Newton tried to uncover both, and in that, he was not unusual. He was simply more brilliant, more obsessive, and more unrestrained in following the instinct we all share. The instinct to believe that behind the world of appearances lies a deeper order, and that we were meant to understand it. The transformation into an enforcer of law. In 1696, Newton was appointed Warden of the Royal Mint. The Mint was responsible for producing England's currency, which at the time was under attack by counterfeiters and coin clippers. Newton approached this challenge not as an administrator, but as a scientist. He went undercover in taverns. He interrogated suspects personally. He built intricate webs of evidence. He tracked patterns of criminal behavior with mathematical precision. One of the most infamous counterfeiters was a charismatic trickster named William Challoner. Challoner believed he could outsmart the system, and even accused mint officials of corruption to protect himself. He underestimated Newton. Newton gathered depositions, interviewed informants, pieced together a timeline, and constructed an airtight case. Challoner was sentenced to death. Newton watched the execution. This moment reveals another startling truth. The same mind that revealed the laws of the universe also enforced the laws of men with unflinching severity. Newton was not just a thinker. He was a force. He believed in order, in the universe, in knowledge, in society, and he would protect that order ruthlessly. If you're still with this story, still tracing Newton's journey through brilliance and darkness, it means you see what makes these lives unforgettable. Genius isn't just discovered in equations, it's revealed in the cost of pursuing them. So if you haven't yet, take a moment to like this video. Because what comes next isn't science, it's transformation. Newton becomes a living legend. By the early 1700s, Newton had become the most revered thinker in Europe. He was knighted by Queen Anne. He presided over the Royal Society. Scholars traveled just to catch a glimpse of him. But here is the strange truth of fame. When Newton reached the peak of the mountain, he did not feel triumphant. He felt alone. He published less. He argued more. He spent more time reorganizing others' work than producing his own. The fire of youth had cooled into a cold sort of control. Yet the world adored him. He had become something like a secular saint, a symbol of rationality, of progress, of the human mind's triumph over darkness. But the real Newton remained hidden beneath that image. A man of faith, a man of fear, a man of anger, a man of vision, a man who longed for truth and yet guarded it jealously. His final years were not peaceful. They were reflective, restless, unfinished, and they prepared the stage for the message that has echoed for centuries. Newton's most famous line, and the secret inside it. In 1675, Isaac Newton wrote a letter to Robert Hooke containing a single sentence that would outlive both of them, a sentence that, over the centuries, has become almost mythic in its simplicity. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. To modern ears, this sounds like the purest expression of scientific humility, a gracious acknowledgement that no genius stands alone, that every great discovery is built upon the efforts of those who came before. It's printed on university walls, engraved in monuments, and recited in classrooms as if it were a holy verse of intellectual modesty. But with Newton, nothing is ever so simple. To understand the weight of this sentence, you must first understand the man it was written to. Robert Hooke was brilliant, astonishingly so. He pioneered microscopy, proposed ideas on elasticity, and contributed meaningfully to gravitational theory before Newton formalized it. But Hooke was also frail, physically deformed, increasingly hunched with age, and deeply sensitive about his appearance. His small stature made him a target for mockery in a society that worshipped physical presence as much as intellectual force. Newton knew all of this. He knew Hooke felt overshadowed. He knew Hooke believed he deserved more credit. He knew Hooke was painfully aware of his own lack of stature, literally and figuratively. So when Newton wrote about giants, was he offering genuine gratitude for the intellectual giants who paved the way before him? Or was he slipping a subtle blade between Hooke's ribs, reminding him that he, Newton, stood not on Hooke's shoulders, but on the shoulders of men Hooke could never match? This question has haunted historians for centuries. Some argue Newton meant the phrase sincerely, as part of a conciliatory gesture to ease tensions between them. Others insist he intended it as a veiled insult, a masterstroke of polite cruelty, wrapped in a sentence so elegant that Hooke could never publicly accuse him of malice without appearing petty. And that is what makes the sentence so extraordinary. Its ambiguity is the entire point. It reveals more about human nature than about science. Because in that single sentence, Newton captured something profound about our species, our ability to be generous and prideful at the same time, our instinct to share credit and hoard it, our desire to honor the past while still ensuring our name is etched above it. We want to acknowledge those who came before us, but we also want the story to revolve around us now. We elevate people and quietly diminish them. We express gratitude while protecting our own legacy. We admire others, but we also want to be first, highest, greatest. Newton's famous line survives, not because it is humble, but because it is honest, in a way few things are. It exposes the tension inside every act of human achievement, the blend of collaboration and rivalry, contribution and competition, reverence and ambition. Science may move forward through cooperation, but scientists are still human. They still feel envy. They still guard credit. They still bruise when honor is misplaced. And Newton, brilliant, wounded, vengeful, magnificent Newton, was no exception. When he wrote those words, he may have intended kindness, or he may have intended a cut so subtle that only Hooke would feel it. But perhaps the genius of the sentence is that it doesn't matter. It is a mirror held up to humanity. We climb the mountain together, and when we reach the summit, we argue over who saw the sunrise first. Newton's words endure because inside them we recognize ourselves, our contradictions, our complexity, our impossible desire to be both part of the chain of discovery and the brightest link in it. A single line, written in passing, has become a portrait of the human mind. The mind that remembers truth and also rewrites it. The mind that collaborates and competes. The mind that dreams of giants and fears becoming small. And in that sense, the sentence may be the truest thing Newton ever wrote. The mind that weighed the world and the heart that bare it. Newton spent his final decades as a living monument, a man revered but rarely understood. People saw the polished marble statue. Few saw the fractures within it. When visitors came to praise him, he received them politely, yet often retreated, afterward into silence. When colleagues asked for his insights, he sometimes gave them generously, other times hoarded them out of suspicion. Even in old age, the battles of his youth echoed in his behavior. And through all this, Newton never stopped revisiting his earliest convictions, that the world is structured, that truth is knowable, that meaning is hidden just beyond our immediate vision, that the human mind, flawed as it is, remains the universe's best chance at understanding itself. He held these beliefs with the same fierce determination that had guided him since childhood. They gave him purpose. They gave him terror. They gave him greatness. They made him human. As Newton entered his final years, he did not look at his accomplishments as flawless triumphs. Instead, he confessed something surprising. I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. The man who explained the cosmos stood at the end of his life feeling small, not defeated, but humbled by the infinite. And that humility reveals a truth far deeper than gravity ever could. No matter how much we learn, we are still standing on the shore of an endless sea. What Newton reveals about humanity, Newton's discoveries, shaped physics and mathematics, yes, but his life shaped something even bigger: our understanding of the human condition. When you look at Newton, not the myth, but the man, you see a living diagram of what it means to be human, a tension between brilliance and fear, clarity and chaos, faith and reason, confidence and insecurity. Here is what he ultimately reveals about us. We are capable of unifying vast worlds. Newton saw unity where others saw division. He believed the heavens and the earth must obey the same laws, and that belief reshaped science forever. This reflects humanity's deepest intellectual instinct: to weave coherence out of fragments, to find patterns where none seem to exist, to refuse to accept a divided reality. We are driven by wounds as much as by wonder. Newton's genius did not emerge from calm curiosity. It emerged from abandonment, fear, anger, alienation. His emotional wounds sharpened his focus. His loneliness fueled his obsession. His insecurity drove his precision. We are motivated not only by inspiration, but by the things we cannot forgive, cannot forget, and cannot escape. We seek both explanation and meaning. Newton explained gravity with mathematics, yet sought meaning in alchemy and prophecy. The rational and mystical sides of us are not opposites. They are siblings. They grow from the same root: a desire to understand everything, not just how the world works, but why it exists. We build worlds and guard them. Newton built calculus, but feared sharing it. He built universal laws, but shaped the narrative around them. He protected his discoveries with the same intensity with which he created them. Creation and possession intertwine within us. We give, but we also withhold. We illuminate, but we also cast shadows. We are powerful enough to transform reality, and fragile enough to be hurt by criticism. Newton could calculate the motion of planets across centuries, but one insult from Hooke enraged him for decades. Even the greatest minds remain vulnerable to the smallest wounds. Genius does not fortify the heart. Sometimes it exposes it. We are capable of seeing the universe and forgetting ourselves. At the height of his fame, Newton saw himself as a child on the beach, playing with pebbles while the vastness of truth stretched endlessly before him. This is perhaps the most profound revelation of all. To understand the universe is to understand how small we truly are, and how astonishing it is that creatures so small can understand anything at all. A man who refused to be simple, Newton has been portrayed in countless ways: the rationalist hero, the cold mathematician, the architect of classical physics, the destroyer of rivals, the mystic searching for hidden truths, the alchemist poisoning himself with mercury, the theologian decoding the book of Revelation. Which one was he? The answer is simple: all of them. And that is the point. Humanity is not singular. Humanity is composite, conflicted, multi-layered. Newton was not the greatest scientist of all time. He was a man who embodied the full range of human potential: our genius, our ego, our longing, our contradictions. He reminds us that the people who change the world are not perfect. They are not balanced. They are not serene. They are storms. Storms that illuminate the sky even as they scar the earth. Storms that reshape continents. Storms that leave behind new landscapes of thought. Newton was a storm, and without him, the world would still be in the dark. The man who measured the heavens returns to Earth. On March 20th, 1727, Isaac Newton died in his sleep at the age of 84. He left behind no wife, no children, no family to mourn him, only a universe forever altered. He was buried with honors reserved for kings and heroes. In Westminster Abbey, his tomb still stands beneath a magnificent monument inscribed with the words, "Let mortals rejoice that such a man has existed." And yet, the man himself, quiet, wounded, obsessive, brilliant, would have likely shied from such praise. He did not see himself as a colossus. He saw himself as a searcher, a child collecting shells, a mind forever staring into the infinite. And this is the legacy he leaves us. Not certainty, not perfection, but courage, the courage to question everything, to look at the world and refuse to accept mystery as final, to believe that the human mind, fragile and finite as it is, can still reach for the laws that bind galaxies. Newton's life is not a celebration of genius. It is a call to wonder, a reminder that the universe, vast and unknowable as it may seem, invites us, again and again, to understand it. And that understanding is not cold. It is intimate. It is human. It is the greatest adventure we will ever have. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the edge of Newton's universe, then you are exactly the kind of mind this channel was created for. A mind that hungers for truth. A mind that isn't afraid of contradictions. A mind that sees science not as numbers, but as a human drama written across time. So if this journey moved you, inspired you, or made you see Newton and yourself in a new way, then do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. There are more minds to explore, more secrets to uncover, more stories where brilliance and humanity collide. Until then, stay curious.